What's going on, everybody? It's Roarwise coming at you with a brand new video, and by the time you're seeing this, it is probably going to be New Year's Eve or beyond, so Happy New Year! So we are finally entering the year of 2023, aka a new chapter for humanity, a new chapter of our lives, and of course a new chapter for Yu-Gi-Oh! And what better way to start off the new year than with one of our monthly tier lists? So there's definitely going to be a bit of an odd one, considering that we are still kind of in our tier 0 format. However, people have made at least a little bit of advances in what you can play and how you can play this format, so that it's not just all doom and gloom. And so I think I'm going to not waste any more time, and I'm just going to jump right into this, starting off, of course, with tier. This is probably just an undisputed tier 0 deck, like, at the moment. And granted, while people have found ways to play around tier just being as powerful as it is, it's still a very difficult deck to beat unless you're on something with the same power level. And the main problem with the format I found is less that there's not cards to counter tier, but more that there's no decks to counter tier, because yeah, you know, Spright had the ability to counter it back during Power of the Elements format, but as tier just got more and more tools to play with, from Darkwing Blast and from Magnificent Mavens and everything, it just became a bit too overwhelming for poor Spright to keep up. And so until roughly February, when we get the new Kashtira support, which will arguably put it on par with the deck, if not stronger, then we're probably going to be stuck in a tier 0 format for a good while. Next up on our list, though, is definitely something that I kind of overlooked a little bit in the last few lists, and that is Draco Slayer. And while I don't want to give it the tier 1 slot like some people were asking me to, I am going to put it in the higher part of tier 2, because Draco Slayer actually has a lot going for it. So not only is it able to put up some really large boards, you know, consisting of the typical things such as Appaloosa and Savage Dragon, things like that, but it's also able to put up some really strong counters to tier such as Abyss Dweller, but also in the form of things like Necro Valley, arguably the strongest generic field spell right now that Mystic Mine is gone, which is like super broken against tier and is completely searchable off of, I believe, not Majesty Pegasus, right? It's the Majesty Maiden Pegasus one from the Draco Slayer archetype. It literally lets you search like any field spell, and so if you're not searching Secret Village, you can search literally the best field spell right now to play because it trumps the best deck in the room. The main reason I had been overlooking it in the last few tier lists and bumping it like at the lower parts of tier 2 or in everything else, I don't really remember too much, was mainly because it wasn't seeing as much success as people had been hoping for it to see, but as I expected and as I have mentioned, it just took a little while for people to actually get a grip on how to play the deck and how to, you know, actually utilize it in a tournament setting, because it is a very complex deck. Like, this is one of those like big brain decks. A lot of pendulum decks actually seem to be, such as DDD and Penmag, but the deck is actually finally seeing top cut success at both YCSs and in regional events, and so that is really exciting. And though it definitely still does get trumped by things such as, you know, Dark Ruler on their end board if they're not going for the Dweller, or, you know, things like Anti-Spell just completely shutting it off, or anything just removing the pen scale like ability, you know, it does get trumped by that stuff, but I do think that it has a lot more potential than some people like to give it credit for, and I do want to apologize to the people in my comments sections who have had to wait so long to see it go up this high. So next up we have Naturia, and Naturia is also a deck that I'm going to be putting in tier 2, and I'm actually, if you asked me like a month ago, I probably would have put it above Draco Slayer, but because Draco Slayer is actually seeing more results, I'm going to be putting it just a peg lower in tier 2, because Naturia is actually a really strong deck to play, but it is also one of those other like really complicated ones, because yeah, it's easy enough to just normal summon Mole Cricket and then make Nat Beast, but when it comes to utilizing the Ishizu cards really well and the Vernisils, and then obviously using your plays with like Kashtira Fenrir, if you want to see some like really awesome gameplay utilizing all of those different things and more, you should totally check out my friend Eldlich if you haven't already. She has a Twitter as well as a Twitch where she streams at, and she's been like absolutely killing it with this deck lately. It's awesome to watch. But I think this deck has some serious potential to completely wreck some shit. So not only, again, are you using the Naturia stuff and the Ishizu stuff and Vernisylphs, but you're also able to use the Runic package from what I've seen. I haven't gotten to actually looking at the actual Runic like plays for the deck, but being able to not only make Nat Beast, but also run the Runic cards, which can just completely annihilate certain boards. Like, the cool thing about Runic is that it's really good at going second due to Flashing Fire, or whatever they named them now. It's like Freezing Curse and I think it's Flashing Fire, yeah. While also being able to facilitate a really strong resource loop with the Fountain, which is really good because Naturia doesn't need to use a field spell. Like, their field spell is literal dog water. And because the Naturia package in itself is just so small, like literally all you need is like the Mole Crickets, Camellias, the Sacred Trees, and the blessings, technically, because you don't even need to go for the sunflower or anything if you want to, like, splash a Nat Beast engine. But, like, you can also run the sunflower as well. You can actually just play so many different things in the deck. You can play hand traps, board breakers, again, all the different engines that I named. And the cool thing about playing the more Naturia-focused parts, where you're actually just using, like, a Ishizu, Vernisylph, etc., is when you can use the Naturia Sunflower, which is a basically 2-use monster negate and destroy because of the Naturia Camellia. And the amazing thing about Camellia is that not only are you replacing the cost of your Sunflower and all of your other Naturias, like, I think it's like Stink Bug and stuff, you're also milling from the top of your deck instead for your cost. So not only is it cost, so your opponent can't really do anything about it, but also it's triggering your Sacred Trees, it's triggering the Ishizu cards, it's putting the Ishizu Shufflers in your graveyard, it's just doing so much. And some of the end boards that I've seen the deck put up are really, really nasty. Like, you can end on, like, Dweller, Nat Beast, Vera, and then, like, another body so that you can have Vera have your zones full, and then Vera can, like, steal something, then that's, like, a negate. I've seen this deck able to put up, like, so many different lethal threats to the point where it's just really scary. The main problem with, like, Naturia is that it suffers from the exact same things that Tier suffers against, like, in terms of tech cards and everything, Di-Fi, Shifter, Macro, Necro Valley, things like that. Except it doesn't have the power to actually push through those or play around them as much as something like Tier can. You know, for example, Tier can play around Necro Valley by having the Perlino up and then chaining the Shizu card to the Necro Valley so that they can shuffle back an Aqua and then use the Perlino to pop the Necro Valley, things like that. It's just the little things that Tier can do to get around their, like, problematic cards, or their problem cards, sorry, is, like, Naturia just can't really keep up as much. So I feel like once Tier itself gets addressed on the next Forbidden and Limited list, or at least on some Forbidden and Limited list, this deck is going to shine a lot more, especially if the Ishizu cards stay, but the Tier cards get hit really bad, which I don't think is going to happen, but if that is the case, I feel like this will be one of the greatest decks to ever use the Vernisylph or the Ishizu packages, so long as either of them are at least somewhat intact. Wow, that was a really long rant about Naturia of all decks in 2023. That's crazy. So next up we have Eldlich, and this is still just not really the format for Eldlich. Like, the problem with is, like, not the trap cards are bad or anything. You know, Skill Drain and things like that are still really strong. Tick Boo, Rivalry Goes, and whatever. But, like, if you're losing your Golden Lords to Magnemite and Saronir and Druis Worm, you're really gonna be in a bad spot, because that just kind of turns off your entire Eldlich package to the point where you're just playing Floodgate Beatdown. And, like, even if you're playing Floodgate Beatdown, if you don't have any Eldliches on board that you can go for, what are you really going to do against some of the best decks right now? Maybe come next Forbidden and Limited list, it'll be a little bit better, but like with Shifter and everything running around and all these counter picks just for basically, it seems like Eldlich at this point, it's just really not going to be that great. Next up we have Spright. This is going to be the first deck in our Tier 1 category. Spright is still Spright. I mean, other than the Ronin Totem ban, it didn't really suffer any hits over the last couple of lists to my knowledge that I can remember at least. The deck is still perfectly capable in doing what it does best, and that is shitting out a bunch of resources that it can continuously recycle, while also having double Omnis per turn on top of that, and the recursion on top of the Toad. Both Nimble Beaver and Spright Starter being 1-card combos into Elf and Toad, while you still have 4 other cards in your hand, is just really, really good, because it really synergizes well with hand traps, especially the Bestials, of course, because the Bestials are just super strong right now, obviously, but they also provide something that Spright lacked before, and that is large bodies. Like, Gigantic was their biggest body, and that would only go up to 3,200 if it had a link, meaning that you'd have to commit so many resources just to make something that can beat over, like, a Chi-Xiao. And while the Bestials can't beat over something like Chi-Xiao, they're definitely a lot bigger than, like, the base, you know. I think 16 is the biggest that Gigantic gets to without getting the link under it, sorry, and then 2K is like the biggest most of their extra deck cards get with the like Sky Cavalry, the Onibimaru, etc. And so it actually at least gives them some way to push for extra damage, especially when they're under something like Shifter, which they can side deck themselves, which is really strong, because if they don't have the Bestials, then they have a really hard time OTKing through Shifter, and they probably get shit on, let's be real. But also, I think that's something that people are still sleeping on for Spright is coming back to the Runic package, because I've seen a lot more pure Spright or pure Bestial Spright than I have seen the Runic Spright, but the runic build I think is just still so strong, because not only are you able to do all the runic shenanigans and all the Spright shenanigans, but the synergy it has with things like Nimble Angler by using your Hugin to discard the Angler and then grab your field spell. You can then use the Angler to special 2 Beavers from your deck, and then you have full combo. Angler plus any runic card is full combo, and you get runic stuff to go off with now. I don't know, I just feel like people are thinking runic is mostly just like a floodgate turbo deck, but I think that the board breaking potential and the engine starting potential that it has is huge, especially considering that this deck doesn't really need its battle phase anyway, because by the time it does get to its battle phase, you'll probably have surmassed enough resources compared to your opponent, as well as just enough like bodies on board or enough leverage to get bodies on board to go for the OTK when you finally need it. It's just a deck that requires a lot of patience and a lot of stalling and grind game success, but if you have the patience and you're able to work with Spright, it is probably going to treat you better than almost any other deck that you've ever played, and that is something that I can say with confidence. Wow, I'm ranting a lot in this video. I mean, I don't know whether to be happy that I'm actually knowing what I'm talking about for once, or if I'm like really angry about how much footage I'm gonna have to edit. So I'm going to do a little bit of cheating so that I can actually plug my own content for those that haven't seen it. But next up, we have Tri-Brigade. Specifically, I wanted to address Bird Up or Tri-Brigade Lyrilusk, whatever you feel like calling it. And I feel like this deck is just so heavily slept on, guys. So the cool thing about Bird Up, I'll have, by the way, a combo tutorial and a deck profile that are already a little bit outdated, that they came out right after the Forbidden and Limited list. I was trying to capitalize on that, but I have made changes to it since. But I'll have those up in the top right annotation. But the cool thing about Bird Up is that you're able to search so many copies of DD Crow, which is really strong against tier, but you also don't really care about the Bystials 99% of the time. The times you do, it's just really painful, but regardless, you don't really care about the Bystials very often. You can set up things like Herald of the Arclight, which is really strong against tier, but also is an Omni-Negate for things like Evenly, which are in the format for games 2 and 3. You can easily break through most boards except for maybe tier. Like you can break through like Spright, Draco Slayer, everything like that by just opening the Lyrilusk cards because of how powerful Zeus is. And it is a deck that can more often than not comfortably play through at least some disruptions due to cards like, you know, 1-for-1 and the extenders with Sapphire, Karis, things like that. And while it definitely does require a like skilled pilot or someone that has like good knowledge of both archetypes, and it also struggles against certain things such as, you know, Necro Valley for the Tri-Brigade engine or for summoning from Grave with Turquoise or Barrel. It also suffers from like, you know, Shifter and other cards that like to hate the graveyard a little bit. It is still a very strong deck in my opinion, and while I don't want to like overhype it in this video like I did in the last one because I was trying to plug more content, I do think that this deck deserves a lot more credit than, or a lot more than people give it credit for. I'm going to put it, because Draco Slayer is seeing more consistent results. I believe this topped maybe one event so far. Correct me if I'm wrong. I know it definitely topped in the OCG, but that's different. I'm going to put it above Naturia because it is a little less complex. However, I'm going to put it under Draco Slayer because Draco Slayer has seen more results. But I just think Bird Up is so strong, especially with that second recital letting you not only just add on to your end board, but also play through more disruptions. But like being able to like end on boards of like, this is just an example by the way, but you can end on like the Utopic Draco Future, which is a monster negate that also steals, which is huge against things like Kate Kalos. You can end on a 4 material Ensemble, which is going to bounce not once per turn every time your opponent special summons. That's huge against something like Spright. It can also end on like Appaloosa with any from like 3 to 4 or even like 5 negates depending on how cracked your hand is. And then of course like double Dragon Lords to bounce things, or Velgar the Desperate Doom Eagle, which basically acts as like a free mini Ashizu card, being able to quick effect shuffle back monsters from the opponent's graveyard, and it is also really good for going for the OTK. And speaking of OTK, you can just go for Zeus and you can go for access code so easily. Fractal is literally a 1-card access code with a guaranteed pop in this deck. It is so wild. But yeah, so while the combo tutorial, oh, maybe not the combo tutorial, but while the deck profile is definitely a little bit outdated by now, I am definitely going to try and get a very big video, like a really in-depth breakdown of the entire deck, my build, my ratios, 10 plus different combos that you can do. I'm going to try to put one of those out sometime this month or next month. It's just going to be like really hectic because there's a lot of things that the new year is bringing for Yu-Gi-Oh! That's going to be content related for me. But I am going to try and have like a massive breakdown video for the deck that you should totally stay tuned for if you're interested in my take on the bird up strategy. It is like the one deck ever that I'm super confident that I'm good with and that I actually know what I'm doing with, and I am really excited to bring it to you guys in the future. Next up, another pet deck of the channel is Dinosaur, and Dinosaur is still not in the greatest spot. Yeah, I'm gonna have to put it at the top of everything else. I might have put it in tier 2 last video, but I feel like that's just a bit too generous. Dinosaur is fine, don't get me wrong, but it did take a big hit with Mystic Mine going to 0, because it was a really good card for the deck going second, and it's also terrible against, you know, Shifter, going against the Ishizu shufflers for your Misk, and all of the other things that are going around right now. It doesn't really care much about the Bystials, but it cares about like literally everything else. But the deck does still have a lot going for it, especially with the Doodle Beast. The end boards that you can end on are actually not that bad. You can end on like either IP or an Apo. You can end on or you almost always end on Tyranno, but then you can end on like 2 rank 4s, especially if you play like the True King package, like the small True King package. Like you can end on like Dweller and then like Dolka or Logia, one of the two. It's just really strong. But I think one of the coolest things that you can use is a small Constellar package in your extra deck. Obviously, like Tolmaeus as well as the Constellar Diamond. You can play both of those, which I think is actually really neat. Or you can play Infinity if you want another Omni on top of like your Logia. Like there's a lot you can do to combat Tier specifically, but the hands are still a little too clunky with only one Misk, and also the follow-up that the deck has is just very, very bad, and it just has a lot of like difficulties dealing with some of the problematic cards this format. And so unfortunately, I don't think I can bump it above everything else. Maybe the bottom of tier 2. We'll see how the tier list ends up looking out. I like to keep it balanced looking, but I don't know. For now, I just think Dino could use a little bit more love and support. Another deck that feels like it's missing so much right now is Invoked. I've been nice to Invoked in the past because I do like the deck, and I think that it had a lot of potential with tier, but between the Bystials and the Ishizu shufflers and everything, Invoked variants are just not in the greatest spot. So much so to the point where I think I'm going to put it above or below. Okay, so it doesn't lose to a single Bystial like Eldlich does, so I'll put it above Eldlich, but I'm going to put it below Dinosaur for now. Invoked just doesn't do enough. So unless you're playing tier Invoked specifically, even decks like Dibs, Dogmatic Invoke, Branded Shaddoll, if you didn't know, they can end on like some decent stuff, but it's just really not very much. It's like Mechaba plus like Mirror Jade, and if you're very lucky, you get like the Dogmatica package with Winda. But even then, those can get outed like so easy in the modern game. You know, obviously your Alistair is weak to your weak to the Bystial stuff, and depending on what you go for between Albion and Lubellion, that's also weak to Bystials. Shifter hurts really bad for the Invoked part of the deck. Like, there's just so many problems that you have to deal with to the point where it's just like, is the one Mechaba really worth it, y'all? And I'm probably gonna get a bunch of people in the comments or on Twitter tagging me saying, yes, it is in fact worth it, but regardless, I unfortunately don't think that Invoked is the way to go this format, and I think this is the one time where it's time to stop normal summoning Alistair, guys. Next up, we have Branded, and I think Branded is still in an incredible spot right now overall. I'm gonna put it in tier 2 above Bird Up because it definitely has a lot of flexibility after the most recent sets and after the Forbidden and Limited list. Keep in mind that we have long since surpassed the days of just Mirror Jade Pass, because not only do you have like your Branded and your Despia stuff, but you also have access to, if you want to, you can play tier engines, but most importantly, you can play the Bystial engine, which is not only good by being Bystials. You know, obviously the Bystials are super strong in this format regardless due to tier and then any other decks that die to them, but they're super, super strong in Branded specifically because of things like Serenir and Bystial Lubellion. So not only are you getting access to your regular Bystial stuff, Bystial Lubellion can search for free Bystials from your deck, while also being able to get you things like Branded Beast from your deck, which is a free pop on top of your already established end board, And then Branded Beast allows you to place something like, say, Branded Regain, or another branded continuous spell that you could have dumped off of, say, Bestial Serenir, which is really good in this deck in particular because it not only serves as a third Bestial name until, you know, we get the fourth one coming out, which is absolutely ridiculous, but it also dumps your branded spell and traps, which gives you a lot of synergy with things, of course, like I said, the Branded Beast. The deck is just a lot more explosive now, and then between things like that and also the lock that you can do with things like Edo, Ra's Disciple, etc., I think that this deck is very slept on overall, even if it does have its popularity. So next up we have Marincess, and Marincess isn't in the worst spot right now, because obviously it does not care about the Bestials, it has the Zealantis lock going for it against any deck except for Tyr, and the Ishizu mill cards are actually pretty beneficial for them because if they don't shuffle back your stuff, and they go first, then when you go to your turn 1, you actually have all of those resources in grave ready to go, because a lot of them say, like, except the turn they were sent to the graveyard, you know, like things like Pascalis, and so that actually helps you significantly, but the problem comes with Super Poly being a card, so if you make like Dweller Argonaut, your opponent's just going to have priority in draw phase, so they can just Super Poly both of them to where you can't even use your Dweller, and you're basically just dead because that's your entire end board gone. It dies to Dimension Shifter because like that just completely turns off all of its combos because it is a graveyard reliant deck. The Ishizu Shufflers are very problematic for them overall, and also hand traps aren't like the greatest thing in this format unless you're playing specifically the Bestials, but the Bestials don't really work in Marincess because all of your stuff locks you into water, so that you can mainly only play things, you know, like DD Crow, Ash, Valor, things like that. But those just aren't really as impactful right now as they have been in prior formats, so maybe if we go into a bit of a slower format, maybe after the next Forbidden and Limited list, or maybe whenever the Forbidden list comes, like halfway through next year that hits both Kashtira and Tyr, maybe then Marincess can come back to fruition, but I think for now, I'm going to find it a nice, comfortable spot. I'll put it above Invoked in the everything else category because it can play power cards such as Rivalry or Gozen, but other than that, it just does not have too much going for it right now. Next up, we have Mathmech, and y'all, I'm sorry, but Mathmech is just such cope right now. The Mathmech adventure thing that our friend of the channel, M-Rocket, made that I do have a deck profile up on the channel is really cool, don't get me wrong, but Mathmech just is not the way to go right now because you're just going to get hit by every single Bestial name under the sun to the point where your small Mathmech engine and then whatever else you have is not going to save you in the slightest. Next up we have Sword Soul, and I think Sword Soul is still a very strong deck. It did recently just top an event or two. I think that there's nothing inherently wrong with the deck. It's not a bad deck. It's just definitely a little too slow due to having too many normal summon reliance, because it was like really good in a format back when it was like Mirror Jade Pass versus like Qixing Longwan Pass, but right now it's just way too slow, and then the Bestials hurt your Tenyi package significantly, which is really important to have your Tenyi package because that's like your way you're breaking boards going second, that's the way you're extending through hand traps, but it's just really not that great to play. I'm going to put it, I mean, it is good at breaking boards going second, and you can play things like evenly and everything like that. I know I'm going to put it in tier 2, but above or below Bird Up. It has seen more results, but I do think I want to put it below Bird Up. I think that Sword Soul isn't a bad deck at all by any means. This is just not really the format for it, unless it's like the only thing that you have going for you, though it is a good budget deck now, which I am very happy to say because it used to be so expensive. So if you feel like getting into the game as a budget player, or if you feel like helping your friend get into the game that's a budget player, then you can hook them up with Sword Soul out of Magnificent Mavens for dirt cheap. So next up we have Madolche. This is a deck that I wanted to keep on the list because I feel like it's still a very strong deck despite having not seen success too recently. I want to put it in tier 2. I think I'm going to put it below Naturia. So the thing is with Madolche is that you're playing like the Madolche, Ishizu, Vernisylph, etc. And it's literally just using the Madolche engine instead of the Naturia engine. So you basically sacrifice the ability to make Nat Beast and having the consistency with the Agido and the Kelbeck and things like that when they're milling, in exchange for the ability to make Dweller very consistently, and in order to have the Glass Souffle, and to have the going second access to Tearlaments, because Tearlaments is quite possibly one of the most broken cards in the entire game, just stuck in an okay archetype. So yeah, I want to put it in tier 2 because it's absolutely not bad at all. It is definitely a fun option to play if you want to surprise people, especially on a lower tier level at like locals or regionals. However, it's basically just the Naturia deck, but like simplified, quote unquote. I mean, the Madolche stuff is also like pretty complicated too. Also, I forgot to mention, they also end on Promenade, and Promenade is really good as well because it's just a free imperm for any card. But the deck definitely has a little bit more weakness than something like Naturia, especially when it comes to consistency issues, because even though you can play Prosperity, Small World, things like that, it has a lot of issues with, like, if your hand is bad, it is unplayably bad. And obviously now you don't really play the Pudding Cess or anything like that anymore. And you only play like the one copy of Salon and everything. And then you either play like one or no Salon or anything like that. But it is definitely a really bad deck to have a bad hand with when compared to something like Naturia, in which your bad hands, you can usually at least do something. Next up is Drytron, and Drytron suffers from the same fate as Eldlich, in that, God, you are just getting murdered by the Ishizu cards. And granted, like, I think Eldlich is a little better because of the floodgates and everything that it can play. But it's like, I mean, Drytron's not that bad, because you can also play some Ishizu cards in Drytron. They have some synergy with like the mills and everything like that. But the Ishizu cards are also your enemy, because your opponent's just going to be shuffling back all of your Drytrons in grave when they activate. And then, of course, like I said, the Bystials and everything like that are just going to give you a huge run for your money. Also, roll Kalos, so just completely murders every Drytron name. Essentially, this feels like the perfect counter format for Drytron, and that's just really funny for me to say. Next up, we have Floowandereeze, and Flunder is obviously also going to be going in the Tier 1 category. I'm actually going to be putting it under Spright, believe it or not. I think in the past I put it just above Spright and like right under tier. And also, I know a lot of other people would put it there. However, Spright is a lot more consistent in multiple different ways than Flunder. Not only just consistent in, like, actually, like, the deck itself, you know, because if you don't draw any combo in Flunder, you're dead. But Spright, most of the time, you can at least do something. But it's also just more consistent at getting top cuts, because while Flunder has gotten second place, you know, twice, it never has quite reached first, and while Spright has also not obviously won, like, any event either, since tier has been super fucking huge, or at least it hasn't won any, like, big events. Sorry, I should mention that. It is definitely a deck that is more consistently able to top and see results than Flunder, because Flunder is just so reliant on drawing those power cards, you know, Featherstorm, Dimension Shifter, things like that, and also just drawing combo, because, yeah, you know, one-card combos are awesome, especially when you can, like, one-card combo off of Rabina, you can 1.5-card combo off of Map and any level 1, or off of the Advent and literally any Winged Beast. But if you don't draw any of those, there is literally nothing you can do except for, like, set one and pass. And then also just not being able to access extra deck toolbox stuff in Flunder is really problematic. Well, I mean, you kind of can, but you have to sacrifice doing literally any combo extension. The deck is super strong in terms of recursion, as well as having, again, the access to those power cards, you know, Empin, Barrier Statue, Featherstorm, Shifter, all those power cards are really strong. However, the deck just suffers significantly when it comes to actual consistency, especially when it comes to, like, you know, bricking in top cut, as we always tend to see with Flunder players. It also took a huge hit for one of the better builds, if not, you know, in my opinion, the best build of Flunder, the going second build, when Mystic Mine ended up getting banned, because Mystic Mine was such a huge power card for Flunder, especially when it comes to sitting on it in the grind game so you can draw into your combo pieces. But losing that, the deck is just a lot worse than it was before, even if it is still a tier 1 deck, because it's able to play just direct counter cards to tier. So next up is Exosister, and Exosister has also been seeing a bit more results lately. However, I still want to put it a little bit below Bird Up, I'm sorry. Like, Exosister, it just doesn't really do as much. Like, when you compare Exosister to a deck like Flunder, not only is Flunder, like, in my opinion, I think Flunder's a little bit more consistent than Exosister. That's just me, because Exosister, it's like, you draw Malfa, or you have to draw, like, a specific 2-card combo. But, like, not only is Flunder more consistent, but, like, you have better use out of power cards than Exosister does, because the only one that they really have on you is, like, Necro Valley, but Flunder can also play Necro Valley, whereas it can also play the Featherstorm, it can also play the Barrier Statue, Empin itself is a Floodgate. But Exosister, their end board is, like, either those power cards, or it's, like, Magnifica, and then, like, Returnia, which is, like, the banished one, correct me if I'm wrong. And then also, if your opponent is not playing a graveyard-focused deck, if you don't have Malfa on board, you're kind of just completely fucked, because if they're just not moving things from the graveyard, you're not getting out your boss monsters, and even if you are getting out your boss monsters, they're all not that fantastic unless your opponent is, again, playing one of those graveyard-heavy decks. Like, Exosister is there as, like, a direct counter to tier, but Flunder is a direct counter to tier while also being a direct counter to, like, most of the other decks, you know? I don't know, I just feel like it doesn't really deserve anything really higher than tier 2, even if it is seeing at least a little bit of results. That's why I'm keeping it in tier 2, but it just feels like a stun deck that could do a lot more, but it just doesn't. I don't know. Next up, we have Kashtira, and honestly, it's a bit weird putting it here now instead of like waiting until the new support comes out, but I'm actually tempted to put Kashtira in the tier 1 category. So Kashtira is a bit of an odd case right now because it's really strong because it can play macro, die-fi, even though obviously those cards aren't too amazing. They are direct counters to tier, and also, you know, shifter, of course. But it also has really easy access, and easier later on, but still easy access to things like Diablosis the Mind Hacker, which can end up just winning you games like automatically, because especially against decks like tier, a lot of players are still only on the 1 kit Kalos because you can recycle it to make the roll Kalos now. And so if you Diablosis, rip their kit Kalos, and then hit a little bit off the top of their deck, you can just completely shut them down sometimes, especially because you can just do it again during the next turn, while also sitting on these cards like Macro, Die-Fi, Shifter, etc. And then also having power cards in the form of like Kashtira Birth. Dude, Birth is actually incredibly underrated. That card is like insane. Basically right now, Kashtira just plays kind of like a stun deck, but you get to summon like huge bunguses that also have really great removal effects. You know, you got Fenrir obviously being so good at seeing play in literally every deck, including its pet deck. And then you have Unicorn, which rips from the extra deck. Even Ogre isn't that bad, because not only are you ripping one from the top of their deck, or not from the very top, but from the top 5, but you also get to like get deck knowledge and stack their stuff back on top. So you basically just get to like Ryza them in terms of like ordering the top of their deck, so you can just completely lock down their draw and just prevent them from drawing anything too great. Not to mention, at the same time while you're doing all of this, you probably also have the ability to be locking down your opponent's zones. There's also the super spicy tech that I don't want to spell too much of now, but Light Force Sword is a card that you'd better start picking up, because Light Force Sword, especially when the new support comes out, not only rips a card from your opponent's hand for 8 turns, it banishes it face down, which means that it's triggering your Diablosis and your Shangri-La. So that means after you full combo when the new support comes out, you're blocking off 3 zones, and then during your opponent's draw, you're banishing a card from their hand, you're blocking off another zone, and then you're using Diablosis to banish like double off the top of their deck than what you already have, and then you Shangri-La again to block off their final monster zone. Y'all, don't be sleeping on Light Force Sword, pick them up now. But yeah, Kashtira isn't even near its full power capabilities yet, but I do think that with its current playstyle, it is definitely a deck to put in the tier 1 category. Next up, we have Virtual World, and Virtual World I'm gonna put, because you can use tier stuff in Invoked, I'm gonna put it above Eldlich, but below Invoked. Y'all, Shen Shen is a fine card, but it's not enough to sit on Shen Shen Chuchi Pass. And when you do draw like a godly hand, you can end on like Shen Shen Chuchi, Kaliga, Crystal Wing. Like if your opponent has Dark Ruler or Droplet, you're kind of just completely and totally fucked. Not to mention that it's hard to do that anyway because the deck is just so inconsistent at what it does. And then, you know, if you just get shifted, you also just kind of explode. So, yeah, overall, I like Virtual World, don't get me wrong. I think the deck is really neat. But come on, Ami, just please just give us some more support. Anything, please. Next up, we have Earth Machine. And I'm not going to actually do my little feud thing with Earth Machine. I don't think I've done that in a while anyway, but I think Earth Machine is actually kind of slept on right now to the point where I'm going to be putting it... I'm going to put it above Invoked, but below Marincess. So Earth Machine is really cool because most of the time, you're not really caring about the Bestials. You don't care too much about the Ishizu stuff, except for when you're trying to use Regulus. It's very consistent, and it's very recursive. It has plays through Shifter, if I recall correctly, and it has access to some pretty neat one-card combos. Also, you have access to Clockwork Knight now, which is yet another way to get access to Regulus, which, guys, stop acting like Regulus is a bad card. Like, Regulus is actually really good. You can also OTK really easily with things like Libe, and then going into Gustav, and also Ruin Force is a very strong card as well. The main issues just end up being that it doesn't do as much as it would probably like to. It's mostly just a consistent and resource-heavy deck similar to Spright, but it doesn't end on, like, Omnis or anything as much as Spright does. Its best end board usually consists of, like, a rank 4, and then, like, Regulus plus something else. Sorry, I'm kind of, like, blanking right now. Granted, you can use a small Ishizu and Vernisylph engine yourself, most likely. I feel like the Vernisylphs are just going to be very good for Earth Machine. But overall, the deck just isn't, like, too amazing, and I hope that you Earth Machine players are happy that I finally gave it, like, a proper explanation. Next up, we have Dragon Link, and I'm going to put Dragon Link in tier 2, but I'm going to put it... I don't know, y'all. Like, Dragon Link, I've seen so many mixed opinions on. I've seen some people saying that it's absolutely cracked, especially because of the Bystials. I've seen other people say that it's complete dog water and that you shouldn't pick it up right now at all. I don't know much about the results of it lately. I haven't really checked much for Dragon Link. So I'm going to put it just above Madolche and below Naturia to be safe. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think Dragon Link has been doing anything like too wild right now. And while it does end off on some really strong end boards, especially with the Bystial stuff allowing you to get access to like the branded beasts and everything, and then also being able to get your combo starters on your opponent's turn when you use something like Magnemite, it does still die to Dark Ruler, and also it has no follow-up unless you use your Borrel, so if you do get your board broken, your Borrel is not going to save you because its effects are negated. Granted, Borrel is a really cool boss monster because it has all that protection on it, but it's not protected from a Dark Ruler. It also has its own problems against things like Shifter and against the Shizu cards and the Bystials, so it can struggle a little bit in this current format. I feel like it's definitely always going to be a deck that's around, as long as the Rockets still exist in my opinion. But I think that right now, it's probably not the greatest pick to go for, even with the Bystials. Finally, we have Sky Strikers. So Sky Strikers not like the worst deck of all time. All the new support that it got is actually really good. And I also think that combining it with the Runic package is really awesome for a going second build. But between Shifter, the Bystials, the Ishizu cards, and literally everything preventing you from even touching your graveyard, it's definitely not in the best shape right now. I'll put it above Virtual World but below Invoked. I think you could probably just get away with playing a Runic build of something else such as Spright, especially considering that in 3 days, so by the time you guys see this actually, we're going to have the unlimited print of Power of the Elements, meaning that Sprite's going to be a lot cheaper. The blues are going to go down from like 30 to probably 20, and I just feel like normal summoning Ray and going into Hayate to poke for 15 is not the way, especially without Mystic Mine. Well, everybody, it looks like that's going to do it for my tier list. Not too unbalanced. I mean, obviously, it's a bit bottom heavy, but I feel like the format is definitely shaping up a little bit better as more people are finding out ways to play around and against tier. Again, I feel like the problem is less that there's not cards to counter tier, and more so that there's not decks that are on the same power level as tier to counter it that way. For example, you know, you had Eternal format. Eternal format had a lot of really strong decks that kind of like barred the entry to some of the other decks, even though it was a very diverse format otherwise. But it had 4 top decks because all of those decks were on a similar or same power level to each other, and they could counter each other properly. So you had like, you know, Thunder Dragon not only countered Sky Striker due to Colossus and everything, but also because it was on a similar power level. I think that once the Kashtira support comes out in Photon Hypernova, and honestly just once Photon Hypernova comes out in general, because of how much new crazy support that February is bringing us for decks, you know, keep in mind the Trap Trick Structure deck's coming out, so stay tuned for all the content I have coming up for that. That's very exciting. But I think once the Kashtira support and like any other support that may elevate other decks to be a little bit higher and closer to tier's level, I think once those come out, it's going to be a huge deal for the metagame, because we're just going to have decks that are finally on a similar or higher power level than tier, meaning that, yes, some other decks are definitely going to be gatekept a little bit from the format even more. However, it is going to make the more competitive side of the format, at least in terms of the top decks, at least a little more healthy. I don't know, that's just my opinion. Let me know yours down in the comments below, because that's going to do it for the video. If you liked it, please be sure to leave a like, as always put this video and the channel into YouTube recommended. And if you like this content, you want to see more like it, like the rest of my tier list, as I said at the beginning of the video, I make one of these every single month for those of you that are just joining this year, then perhaps consider subscribing, because it supports the channel more than anything else, plus it's absolutely free. Also, let me know your New Year's resolutions down in the comments below. I usually try to stick to mine, and then I end up flopping within the first few months like most people tend to do, but I want to hear what other people are trying to do this year to better themselves, whether it's Yu-Gi-Oh related or not. Be my guest, I don't really mind. But once again, thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. This is Aurora, signing off.